I think you all know that I believe, to a large extent, the future of this country depends upon a strong and growing trade union movement. And in that regard, I am really delighted to have with us today the leader of the president of the United Automobile Workers of America, Shawn Fain, who in the last year has played an extraordinary role, not only in fighting for his own members, and we're going to discuss some of the victories in a minute, but also, I think, showing the American people in general what trade unionism is about and how unions can fight to improve life for all Americans. Shawn, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Bernie. It's great to be here.
All right, let's start off. Rumor has it you were born in Indiana.
Yeah, Kokomo, Indiana is right in the center of the state, just a working class community, about 50,000 people, and really at that time when I was younger, it was a GM town. A very similar story to a lot of areas in this country, but there was literally 9 or 10 GM plants in that community, and a lot of industry, but GM was the.
So it was a manufacturing center.
Town, yeah.
Most people worked in. And what was the politics of the community at that point?
Yeah, it was always pretty heavily Democratic. So always seemed the Democrat Party had a majority of the city council seats, the mayor's race. I mean, every now and then they would elect a Republican, but predominantly Democrat.
So that was a typical working class community that in those days voted Democratic.
You bet.
What's happened since?
It's it's kind of the same story in a lot of areas in rural America or smaller communities in America. We've seen a lot of those jobs, working class jobs, disappear. What used to be 15,000 GM employees is now around 120 left. And,
15,000 to 120.
Yeah. And Stellantis is actually there's 4 Stellantis plants there now, and roughly 8,000 employees. But so it's still generally a working class community. But over the course of the last 30 years, 40 years of my life, seen a dramatic shift really in the politics. So a lot of industries left, and I would have bet my life you would never see this, but in the last citywide election, all these city council seats went to Republicans, and the mayor's race went to the Republican, which never in my life did I think I would see that in a community.
All right, we're going to talk about that in a moment, but you've had a hell of a year. You've been you were elected head of the UAW, about a year ago?
Yeah.
And what a year it's been. Talk a little bit about what you have tried to do as the president of the UAW and what you've accomplished.
Well, the biggest thing was, the whole reason I ran for this was just, I was a frustrated member for 28 years.
You were an electrician, is that what?
Yeah, I was an electrician by trade when I started out at Chrysler 30 years ago now. And, I ran for a union rep position in my plant over 20 plus years ago, just, out of wanting to have a bigger impact, and just wasn't happy with the way things were in my plant. And I was elected to 5 terms in my plant, and then I was actually a national negotiator during the recession, during the bankruptcy for Chrysler. And, that going through those experiences, I think really, gave me a lot of insight to what was going on, and really, I was put on international staff in 2012, so 12 years ago, and moved to Detroit at that time, and just really, as a worker on the floor, as a local rep, even as a national rep, was very frustrated with where our union was, because it was very much what I call a company union, where the company and the top leadership of the union were just too close, and really there was no separation there, and workers continue to go backwards, even in the times of great profits.
Talk a little bit about, you came onto the national scene because of your negotiating with the big 3 auto companies, and you won an amazing victory for your workers, not you, but the whole union together, standing together. What was going on? If I'm a union worker, if I'm a UAW guy for the last 20 or 30 years, what was going on in my job? How was I doing?
So, that's the thing. During the recession, workers made a lot of sacrifices, wages, work rules, all those things, overtime agreements, temp abuse, escalated.
Explain temp abuse. People don't know that.
Yeah, temporary workers. So the companies, it used to be there was a cap on how many temporary workers could work, and there were strict rules on they could only work on weekends, things like that. It basically, at that point, after the recession, manifested to they could work 7 days a week.
And how does it? I'm a temp. You're a regular. What do I get paid compared to you?
Temporary workers made virtually half of what a full-time worker made, and so. And it started creating a lot of dissension among the ranks when you're on a line doing the same work as someone next to you, but you're making half the money and you don't have a pension, you don't have the same benefits. Naturally that creates a lot of issues. And so, and those things, the company always prayed, they always played upon in the name of competition. We had to do these things. But competition to me is code for a race to the bottom. And so they would use the lowest paying bidder and say, we got to compete with that. And our leadership at that time really didn't, in my opinion, challenge that. And I believe this last year is an example of what happens when you do challenge that.
And what happened? Talk about the results of your...
So, yeah.
You went on strike?
Yeah, our strike. So when I became president, look, I really felt like we needed radical change in this union and what we did. And so we really brought in some new people, combined that with some people that were existing, and revamped how we were going to go about doing things. And so we ran our first ever contract campaign to get the membership rallied around our issues, and then we went into the contract bargaining fight. We had a very different tone with the companies. We said the deadline meant something. When the contract deadline got there, it's a deadline, not a reference point. And the companies chose to not believe that we meant that.
Did I recall you walking in with a T-shirt that said "Eat the Rich"?
You bet. That was one of the meetings, and that's what this is all about. I mean, our fight, and I think that's why it resonated so much in this nation. Although we're a union, it's been no different for working class people, union or not, in the last several decades. We've seen this huge concentration of wealth at the top, and working class people have been left behind. And so that really was what our fight was about. And as we talked about those things, workers were tired of making all the sacrifice. And in the times of
let me interrupt you, because I know something about these things. I got to admit, even I was surprised. It came out that when you began your negotiations, there were new workers at the big three who were making what, 17, 18 bucks an hour?
Yeah.
Can you imagine that? And what happened to wages over the years in real dollars for automobile workers? So
they severely went backwards. We actually, in our planning leading up to bargaining, we actually looked at 2007, and in 2007, a new worker would start at 19 and 50 some cents per hour. When you fast forward to 2019, 12 years later, the starting rate was 18.04 an hour. It actually went back.
12 years come and go, and wages go down.
Yes.
And no doubt, let me guess, the CEO said, "You're hurting. We're going to cut our wages and salaries and benefits," right? Is that what they did as an example?
No, I think their wages went up, by the multitudes, hundreds of percent in some cases. And, in the 4 years leading up to the contract, CEO pay at the big three alone had escalated over 40%.
What, the woman who's running GM made $29 million or something?
Yes.
Is that right? Roughly, right?
Yep.
Okay. But your success has not only been at the big three. You took a fight. You did something. These guys did something really heroic and of national significance. They went to the South. And it's no great secret to anybody who knows anything about labor history in America that the South has done everything they could to resist unionization, to pay workers some of the lowest wages in America. Talk about your campaigns in Tennessee and Alabama.
Yeah, so, I've always been a firm believer when I campaigned for this job. I talked a lot about how, in my opinion, bargaining and organizing go hand in hand. And I looked at my grandparents' generation as a great example of that. They left the hills of Tennessee and Kentucky after a depression and moved north, and they were able to get jobs in UAW factories at GM and Chrysler, and they lived the American dream. I mean, it was life-changing for them. And so, when we ran our big three fight, on strike and trying to fight for better conditions for the workers, we started seeing a lot of non-union workers all over the country started sending in cards they were signing to join the union.
They saw the success, your ability to substantially raise wages, and they said, "Hey, pay attention to us."
Yeah, and so it really, that flagged it for us that workers were fed up. Whether they're union or not, as I said, working class people in this country are fed up with being left behind, and so we started reaching out to some of these workers, and we had some unsuccessful drives at Volkswagen in the past, and so we just really started focusing on all these companies, all these workers nationwide at non-union auto plants, automakers, and the Volkswagen group, the workers there really seemed to be more energetic and were signing more cards at a faster pace. So we just decided to focus there and move forward.
That's in Chattanooga, right?
Yeah, in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And so, and literally when you look at that campaign, it was amazing to see the energy from the workers, just a desire to want better for themselves. And it was a massive, most people said we could never win down there. Every time I would do an interview leading up to the vote there, the interviewers would always say, "Do you really believe you can win in the South?" And very cynically, and and I believe we could, because I knew where these workers were and that they wanted better for themselves, and so it was really just a historic moment.
And you not only won. I mean, I was watching the results coming in; they were coming in live, and I saw 70% pro-union. I thought, I can't believe this. It's going to go down. It didn't. You ended up with what?
73%.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
See, that's something nobody thought you could win to begin with. 73%, unbelievable. All right. You went then to Alabama with Mercedes-Benz. Talk a little bit about that.
So yeah, Mercedes was a different story. I mean, and the same story with the workers. The workers were tired of being left behind. I mean, these are all worker-led drives. I mean, the workers were leading these drives, and we were just giving them the tools and giving them the assistance they needed. But it was a very different campaign. Volkswagen, said they would stay neutral. They weren't completely neutral, but what we would call subdued. They didn't really have an aggressive.
Let me jump in. You know this stuff. Let me translate it.
Yeah.
All right. Historically, what happens in this country, companies spend probably hundreds of millions of dollars in union busting activities, all kinds of ways to try to convince workers. And, it's interesting. You had a connection with some of the German unions as well. So Volkswagen was more or less neutral. Comes to Mercedes-Benz. Talk about a little bit what they did to try to beat the union.
And so a lot of times most always when organizing campaigns, when you're trying to organize non-union companies, the companies will, they'll break the law. They'll have what we call captive audience meetings, where they'll call workers in and they'll, give veiled threats such as, if you vote for the union, the plant may close, or, future product won't come here, or fire workers. At Mercedes, they fired a couple of workers in the process to try to dissuade and discourage workers, to put fear in workers of wanting better.
Not to mention, I thought it was funny, every one of the six Southern governors issued a major statement, got a whole lot of publicity, that the UAW unions are against the values of the South, right? And we strongly oppose union organizing. So that's what you're up against.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so it, so Mercedes' campaign was very different than the Volkswagen campaign. It was very, the company was very aggressive toward the workers and putting fear into the workers. And, but ultimately, the amazing part of that fight is, we lost roughly 300 votes would have flipped the election. We would have won it. But so we were that close. And, but the silver lining in that is over 2,000 workers at that plant of 5,000, voted for the union and were brave enough to vote for the union, even given all those things. And so I do believe we'll win there in the future. I believe that you're going to continue to see that grow. And and it doesn't, like I said, we've learned lessons from that. But I think the biggest thing going forward is just that we continue to do what we're doing. We've had another big win at Daimler Trucks in the South, in North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, won a record contract there.
And you did something really interesting. Tell the Lordstown story.
And so,
I want people to hear this.
And so just last week, we came to a tentative agreement at Lordstown, Ohio. Used to be a GM assembly plant there that was closed in 2019, and workers were displaced, sent all over the country, and under the Biden administration, a new battery plant was located there. And so when I took over as president, the current status of that location was the starting pay was $16.50 an hour, and it would take 7 years to get to $20 an hour. And really, it was on a race to the bottom. And we made it our goal to turn this battery EV industry around, to set a standard and carry that standard elsewhere. So we just actually concluded bargaining there last week, and really happy to say, the workers still have to vote on this, but at the end of this agreement, the workers will be starting out at $30.50 an hour, and full pay will be making over $35 an hour. So it establishes a living standard, a good standard, which is what the EV battery transition should be, what we call a just transition.
So that's an extraordinary victory. So what happens is, years ago, people had a good job, jobs completely gone. A new plant came in, terrible wages, and the UAW raised those wages to a living wage. Congratulations, That's an extraordinary victory.
Well, thank you.
All right, let's take a look. You and I have chatted about this. Why is it that a majority of workers in America actually look at the Republican Party as a party that can help them more than the Democrats? What's going on there?
I think workers honestly are just fed up in this country. They're fed up with being left behind, and I think there's a lot of maybe populist rhetoric that comes from the Republican Party. I mean, I think some of the candidates are good at telling people what they know they want to hear, and when workers are fed up and they're hungry, they're going to listen to any message that sounds like a better alternative. And I believe I say this all the time. If you look at our contract campaign in the Big Three, and even since then, all of our contract campaigns, they're literally about 4 issues. And to me, whether you're union or not, those are the 4 issues that matter to working class people, because that's where they went backwards. It's living wages, it's adequate health care, it's retirement security, and it's getting our lives back, getting some of our time back. Workers are working 7 days a week, they're working multiple jobs, and they're scraping to get by. And that's not how this should be in the greatest, what we call the beacon of the world. And we can do better.
And the wealthiest country in the history of the world.
You bet. how
do workers feel, in your judgment? I know you're running around the country talking to your people, when they see CEOs making, 200, 300, 400 times more than they make.
Oh no, it enrages people, and the prime example is looking at, in our Big Three fight, as we were bargaining and winning a record contract. You heard the company rhetoric saying, "Oh, it's going to make us raise the price of vehicles. It's going to, we're not going to be able. We're going to have to close plants or lay people off." None of those things are true. The irony is, you look at what happened. We bargained a record contract at GM. Within 2 weeks of that contract being ratified, GM paid out $10 billion in shareholder dividends, and actually just today they announced they're paying out another $6 billion, $16 billion in shareholder dividends and stock buybacks in less than a year.
And they were telling you that they just didn't have enough money to raise worker salaries.
And CEO pay. You look at Carlos Tavares at Stellantis. His pay last year went up over 56%. He went from, I know he was struggling to get by at $23.5 million a year.
Hey, 23 million.
So now he's at 39.5. So hopefully he'll be able to make it and make ends meet, with that money. But, when working class people are in there scraping to get by, obviously, there's a huge problem.
All right. What Shawn and the UAW, in my view, have done, and Shawn just said this, is they hit a nerve. And that is that, and I want to say this because very few people mention this fact. Over the last 50 years, 50 years, real inflation accounted for wages are actually lower today for the average American worker compared to where they were. And you're talking about, you and I have talked about pensions in the past as being your grandparents, your parents who worked in an automobile plant, they had a defined benefit pension. They knew what they were going to get, right?
Yep.
And what's happened to pensions over the...
Yeah, so, again, another attack on working class people is, pensions have went by the wayside. I believe less than 13% of this nation have a defined pension benefit at retirement. And, it's been replaced by 401k plans and, which relies predominantly on the stock market. And, it's kind of like, going to the casino with your retirement. So it's obviously not a secure, it's not a guarantee.
It's funny. We had a hearing, and one of your members was there, whose name slips me, a very nice young woman, who was comparing her fears about retirement with her parents and grandparents, who had better retirement plans than she has. And this is true all over America. We don't talk about it, but half of workers in America today have almost zero in the bank as they face retirement. And that's an issue you've been banging away at.
Yeah, and I mean, when we say retirement security, that's, literally, you see it. I've seen it in my own family with aunts and uncles that worked their entire life and worked hard, worked in GM. But people, I've seen this a lot with our senior citizens. They reach, their later years. They're too old. What Walter Reuther called too old to work and too young to die. Those should be your best years after working hard your whole life. We're taught growing up in this country, you work hard, you play by the rules, and you're going to be fine. And we see people now, as they reach their older years, choosing between paying medicine or being able to pay rent. People that have an unfortunate incident, whether it be Alzheimer's or something like that end up having to go to assisted living, and they literally have to sell off everything they own to pay $8,000 to $12,000 a month, to live in basically what you would call almost a prison cell, a 10 by 10 room with a twin bed, and that's not what we should be. We're better than that as a nation, and we have to be better than that. And that to me is what, when we talk about retirement security, it's all those things. You shouldn't have to choose between being able to afford your medicine or afford, food or shelter. And
well, this is an issue I think that resonates all over the country. Now, you raised during your contract negotiations with the big three an issue that people thought you were a little bit crazy to raise because they thought it came out of nowhere, but it didn't. And you fought for a 32-hour work week.
Yeah.
Why did you do that?
I was actually, when I would go up to our educational center in northern Michigan, I would spend time in the library there reading old, what we call Solidarity magazine, which is our publication for years. And I was reading in the 30s and 40s. Our leaders back in UAW in those times were talking about, back then, a 32-hour work week, a 30-hour work week, a 35-hour work week. And somehow that stopped along the way. It just got lost after probably the 50s. And, we end up migrating to work schedules where people are working 7 days a week. They're working, different shifts, crossing shifts, and
say a word on that. All right. I got to say that the last year, I didn't know this. And I think many viewers don't know this. The kind of insane hours and schedules that workers, not only in the automobile industry, but all over this country at work. Give a few examples of some of the schedules that auto workers have to deal with.
So in an effort to, again, for the companies to maximize profits for the shareholders and the CEOs at the expense of the workers, they run with the minimum manpower possible. And what they end up doing is increasing the hours they work. So some workers will work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day.
Right, say it again. This is America, right?
Yeah.
The year 2024.
Yeah.
You know of workers?
7 days a week, 12 hours a day.
How do you live doing that? What happens to you?
You don't, when you're working those kind of hours, everything else is sacrificed. Time at home with your family.
Right. Your mental health. Who the hell could?
Even if you don't have a family, just time pursuing things that you want to do, just hobbies. Pretty much when you work that kind of schedule, you work all day, you maybe throw some food in when you get home and you go to bed. And it's not a life. And I believe COVID really, on top of looking at those issues, I believe, the mental health issues are huge because when people are working those kind of hours and they're still struggling to get by, mentally it affects people. But then on top of that, I think the COVID pandemic really made people in this nation reflect, and not just this nation, this world.
Yeah.
I think it made them reflect on what's important in life. And what's important in life is not working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, or working 2 or 3 jobs to scrape to get by. People want a life and they want their time back. And so I really believe that it's a major issue. And I believe, in this technological revolution we're in nowadays, technology, we should be the master of technology. It should not be mastering us.
You got it.
With these technology advances, workers should have to work less for the same or better wages and get some quality of life back. But unfortunately, the corporate world's taken those advances and eliminating people and then making those who are left work longer hours and harder, and people are still...
See, I've been saying the same thing, but he said it better than I did. And that's the simple reality. Shawn, let me change subjects a little bit here. People thought you were a little bit crazy to be introducing into your contract negotiations with the big three the idea of a 32-hour work week. Where did that come from? Why'd you do that?
So we have a training center in northern Michigan that I spend a lot of time at, when we have conferences going on. And, those times I would go up there. We have a library there, and I would read old Solidarity magazines, which was our publication we would put out to the members monthly. And I would read magazines back in the 30s and 40s, and it was really interesting. A topic kept coming up from our leadership, and it was talking about a 32-hour work week, a 35-hour work week, a 30-hour work week. And so it was interesting. As I kept going through those, I noticed, later on that topic just kind of disappeared. But I was amazed that our leaders back then were talking about, less working hours. And so, I just have always questioned that, saying, what happened? Because instead of pushing for working less hours, now we're working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, a lot longer hours. And so, I felt it was imperative we start talking about that again and push for that, because, it's about quality of life issues.
Right. I'll tell you something. I'm really glad that you raised that issue during the negotiations. I think it got a lot of people thinking about it. And it's an enormously important issue. And here's the reason why. Human beings create this technology. It should benefit all of us, not just the owners of the technology. And the irony is, you can tell me the average automobile worker today is how many times more productive in producing product than the case 50 years ago? Many times, I would imagine. Yes?
Oh, yeah, hundreds of times more.
All right, so they're producing far, far more, and yet until very recently, they were actually earning lower real dollars than inflation accounted for dollars.
Yeah.
So the question is, who benefits from the technology? And I think your radical, revolutionary idea was that ordinary people should benefit, not just the CEOs.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, it's amazing that they paint this as some radical idea.
Right.
This was, as I say, this was being talked about in the 1930s and 1940s.
Earlier than that.
And earlier. And the interesting part is, the saying that we should master technology, not let it master us. And with all these advances in technology, we should be utilizing that so workers can work less hours and have more time to spend with family, to go to ball games, to or to pursue, if don't have a family, to pursue interests that they have outside of work. Right. Because the way it is now, working class people's lives revolve around work first, and everything else comes second. And that's not how we are designed as human beings. And so I truly believe, the COVID pandemic, if it taught us anything, it was that workers, the fast food industry, for example, there was a great lesson there. They stayed home. They said, what, I'm not going to work for $10 or $12 an hour, risking my life. And what happened? They started raising the pay to $20, $25 an hour. So to me, there was a great lesson in that, of the power that we have as a working class. And, so this whole issue to me is about taking our lives back and getting our time back.
Absolutely. Right now, everybody knows we're in the midst of another technological revolution with AI and increased robotics. And workers all over this country are frightened that the job they have today is not going to be there. And it's not just blue-collar workers, it's white-collar workers. Everybody's frightened. Human beings developed this technology. It has the potential to radically improve the quality of life. Mm-hmm. You know what it would mean to people if they could work 32 hours a week, they have more time with their kids, as you indicated, more time for leisure, recreation, whatever it may be. We should not be afraid of that technology. We should control that technology so that it helps all of us not just make the rich even richer.
Yeah, and that's the reality of what we've lived. We've really seen it in manufacturing with the advances, because what the corporations have done is, rather than take those advances and keep people working and let them work less hours, for the same or better money. And what they've done is they reduce the amount of people working, and the people that are left with the job are going to work more hours, longer hours, and work harder, and until they find a way to advance technology more and reduce it. So that's really, and that's the frustration of workers. They're not seeing the advantage of technology because a lot of them are being left behind with those advances. And we're, again, we have to master that, not let it master us.
No, I think this is, I introduced legislation for a 32-hour national work week with no loss of pay. And I got to tell you, as I go around the country, I was surprised. People come up to me and they say they really support that concept. As you indicate, they're overwhelmed, they're stressed out. There's a mental health crisis going on in this country. People are worried about their kids. People need more time to live their lives and not just work and work and work. And if you're a white collar worker, you have your cell phone with you 24 hours a day. You're working Saturdays, you're working Sundays, you're under a lot of pressure. Blue collar workers worse. We can do better than that as an issue. So I'm really glad that you raised that issue and you put it out on the radar screen so that people are beginning to talk about it. Let me go to another area. As everybody knows, we have a campaign going on of enormous consequence to the future of this country. And I know that for a variety of reasons, people are less than enthusiastic about the Biden campaign. I'm supporting the president. Shawn is supporting the president. Shawn, when you go around the country, what's your argument as to why people should be voting for Joe Biden and not Donald Trump?
For us, it really came down to this. Just like in our contract fight in the Big Three and our other campaigns since, we look at facts, we utilize facts, and to really paint the picture. We talked about in our Big Three fight how the Big Three had made $250 billion in the last decade while wages went backwards. And so when we went to look at the presidential election, we really did the same thing. We basically, rather than looking at party politics or taking an opinion from me or someone else, we put the facts in front of us. And it was really interesting when we did this. We did a side-by-side of Trump and President Biden in their own words and their own actions. And it told a real telling story for us because, when we looked at that, you go clear back to the recession in 2008, 2009, Trump at that time was blaming the unions and blaming the workers for their contracts as the reason that the companies were in trouble. And that's a complete fallacy. At that time, Vice President Biden with President Obama, they worked on a path forward. They bet on the American worker. I like to say that the Obama administration and President Biden bet on the American worker. Donald Trump blamed the American worker. You go to the 2015 when Trump was running for president, he actually talked about in the Midwest doing a rotation of our good paying jobs to another area of the country where they pay less money, and in turn would have these workers up north begging for their jobs back at any rate, at any wage. In essence, driving a race to the bottom. And so you look at that, this is the most telling part to me. In 2019, Lordstown Assembly Plant in Ohio was closing. Donald Trump was president. He did nothing and said nothing to help change that situation. And also in 2019, General Motors workers went on strike for 40 days. Again, as president, he did nothing and said nothing to support those workers. You fast forward to 2023, we had the same situation of a dying community in Belvedere, Illinois. President Biden's administration got involved with us, worked with us to help find a path forward, to put product there, and not just get product to that plant, but also build a battery plant there, saving a community. Also, in 2023, during our stand-up strike, for the first time in our history, in our nation's history, a sitting U.S. President, Joe Biden, joined us on the picket line.
All right, that's no small thing. So whatever you want to say about Biden, and I have criticisms, I know Shawn does, for the first time in American history, a president of the United States walked on a picket line in the middle of a very, very contentious strike. He showed the world which side he was on. That had an impact.
And so, even outside of that, we talk about retirement security. President Biden has pledged over and over that he will not stand for cuts to Social Security or Medicare, whereas when Trump was president, every year of his presidency, he pushed for cuts to Medicare and Social Security. You look at the tax break under Trump, that 80% of the benefit went to the top 1%. When we compare all those things side by side, it told a very telling story. And that's not my words. That's not party politics. That's these two gentlemen in their own words and their own actions. And when we compare that, the choice to us was very clear as far as why we endorsed President Biden. And because in essence, to me, it's just in short, I put it this way. Joe Biden spent a lifetime serving people and serving others. Donald Trump has spent a lifetime serving the billionaire class and serving himself. And that's the choice we have before us. And right. So that's why, to me, it's that simple.
All right, let me switch gear one more time. Where do you want the trade union movement to be 10 years from now?
I'm hoping we are beating the global corporate world at their own game. I talk a lot about, another thing we did with our Big Three contract is we set the contract deadline, which is usually the middle of September, We changed it to the end of April 2028, May the 1st, 2028, which is May Day, International Solidarity Day. And we did that for a reason, because, as I talked about the lessons through COVID pandemic, where workers, stayed home and because of that, we're able to get pay increases. It taught us a valuable lesson about, the working class people have the power, but unions have to lead that movement. We have to harness that power, union or not. We have to bring workers together all over not just in America, but all over the globe.
Sure.
And so we're pushing, my vision, for years from now, May Day 2028, actually less than a decade, but, we want to see working class people all over this globe come together. The only way we're going to beat the corporate global fight is by standing together globally and fighting for better standards for everyone and standard wages for everyone, so we lift everyone up everywhere. So, that's a long-term picture, I know. And to a lot of people, that seems like a pipe dream. I don't believe it is. The one thing we learned in our Big Three fight, 75% of Americans supported us in that fight. And there's a reason why they supported us, because the issues we were talking about, whether you're union or not, we're all living the same reality as working class people. And it's not just in America, globally, all over the globe, people reaching out to us in that fight because they're all feeling the same thing. So I believe, we harness that power. And I believe that, that's the beginning of us taking our lives back as a working class globally.
Well, somebody who grew up in the working class, I just want to thank you very much. And what Shawn is saying is, it's not just an American issue. It is a global issue. Never before in our country's history and in the world's history, this is not rhetoric, this is fact, have so few people owned so much and had so much political power. And what you're seeing is the oligarchs, whether they're in Saudi Arabia, whether Elon Musk, whatever it may be, these guys are organized in a very efficient way to gain even more wealth and power. It is not good enough for them that the top 1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 95% of the entire world. It's not good enough for them that 3 people in America own more wealth than the bottom half of American society. Believe it or not, they want even more greed. And what Shawn is talking about is a very different paradigm. And it's how do you create an economy that works for all of us? Healthcare is a human right. Education is a human right. Imagine using technology to improve life for working people, not just to make billionaires even richer. That's the struggle we're in. And I said at the beginning of this podcast it's going to be the trade union movement that leads us in that direction. Because at the end of the day, you think you're going to get anywhere standing up to your boss all by yourself. Oh, yes, no doubt they'll want to hear your concerns, really. All right? It's going to have to be people coming together by the millions. The unions are the vehicle to do that, bringing the unions together. Bottom line is having the majority of the people run this country rather than the few. On that note, Shawn Fain, congratulations for everything you've done, and best of luck to you in the future.
No, thank you. Yes.
All right. Thank you all very much. Take care.